solidarity.
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The Sheikh wanted me to remind people about fundraising, and I apologize because I haven't figured out the best way to do the adopt a surah, but inshallah, I promise I will do that soon. But I can say that we have been actively trying to get bookcases, like purchasing them, building them, found someone local to help us put some together. So if you want to support that effort, you can definitely adopt a bookcase for $200 because the cost of the bookcase is about 100 and about 150, 160. Then the cost of the guy coming to put it together, it adds up to close to 200. So, and then we'll hope to be able to get a plaque with your name or something like that. So
you can explain to them why we have to hire someone to build it, because like we're so low on manpower.
Okay, yes, that is true. So yeah, Rami wanted to remind me, I mean, because the reason why we need to hire someone to come and build bookcases is because we are low on manpower. And so, I mean, when you're talking about, 100 bookcases at a time, and each bookcase takes about half an hour to put together if you know how to do it, it's a lot. And so, and we can't put the books up on the bookshelves and have it become a working library. And organize things, which is its own task, until bookcases are actually built and set up and everything like that. So it's a very long process, honestly. So it's a very complicated process, and actually we should probably tell more of the story because it is actually very interesting. But it takes a lot of work and a lot of expertise as well. So it's a fascinating project. And just to say, this is probably the world's largest private collection of Islamic law sources, among other things. We have a huge, what we call humanist library. So it's its own university. We have every single subject matter from, history to philosophy to ethics to comparative religion to literature. And I mean, there's just so much. So people, could come and study what's in this library as its own as its own source of knowledge. I mean, I know that the Sheikh was telling me that sometimes now there's a whole field that involves studying the library of scholars and also, what went into, all the different pathways of knowledge that you can take in this library. So it's really fascinating, and it's something that we definitely want to share in the future more about.
And so, does it count as a sadaqah jariyah?
Does it count as a sadaqah jariyah? Yes, yeah. Absolutely. So please do donate for that reason. Okay, so who would like to start off? Come on, Rami.
Hello. So first, thank you so much, of course, for another incredible surah. I mean, there were so many takeaways from this, and I have two questions, but I'll just start with this first one. So obviously, one of the key takeaways from this surah was that virtuous leadership comes over political opportunism. And today, especially in the United States, we see that it's kind of become trendy for young Muslims especially to start navigating in the space of political activism or even just politics in DC, for example. So we see now there's many organizations that advocate for Muslims in congressional offices as interns and then just leading their way up to be public servants. But obviously there are many, shortcomings that come with this, and there are a lot of principles that have to be sacrificed. So I think my question, and I apologize, this might be a little difficult, but I guess, what would you say directly to a lot of these young Muslims? Because, being one, I personally was one who was interested in this field at first, and I know a lot of young Muslims my age that are still interested in this field of even becoming public officials or whatever. What would you say to them directly? Would you say that, for example, if you want to go about this road, you have to be very clear and say that there will be sacrifices that you will have to make, and of course that might jeopardize their chances, because why would anyone running for office, go out front and run on that platform? Or would you just say it's not ethical, you have to find another, you should focus on, for example, this type of work, and then possibly give away to the bills and whatnot that they could contribute to, if really it's necessary that a Muslim makes those bills, because those could come anyway. So, or is there a third way as well? So, just interested to hear your perspective on this, because I think especially for young Muslims today, that could be really helpful.
Great question. Do you want to paraphrase?
Yeah, I mean, the question is about political activism and the challenge of morality. Of course, it's a complicated thing. So on the one hand, political empowerment for a very small minority in the West is an absolute necessity, because Muslims are a very small minority, and because they are a very small minority, they are also disempowered, maybe even disproportionately disempowered to their numbers, and the disempowerment has very concrete results. It results, among other things, in the absence of Muslim issues on political agendas, and results in the continuation of systematic methods of oppression for Muslims, oppression which is a product of disempowerment. I mean, if you're disempowered, even if as an individual you are not oppressed, because you're capable of realizing your potential, but collectively you are oppressed because you're disempowered, meaning that your needs and your priorities and your interests are not getting represented on the table, and they're being largely overlooked. And the problem was this form of disempowerment is that it has a very concrete result in very high attrition rates among Muslims, in that a lot of our children, as they grow up, they're not Muslim anymore. And they're not Muslim anymore because they're a product of social processes, and the social processes that they are a product of, it's not cool to be a Muslim. It is not trendy to be a Muslim. It is not socially accepted to be a Muslim. These are the concrete results of disempowerment. It is not within the fabric of reasonable pluralism to be a Muslim. So, pluralism posits a paradigm for reasonability, what's reasonable. But when you are really disempowered, pluralism leaves you out of the paradigm of reasonability. So being a Muslim, in effect, is not reasonable. Or the only reasonable Muslim is really someone who's not a Muslim at all. They may be reasonable by descent. I mean, Muslim by descent, but that's pretty much it. So that's all on the one hand. On the other hand, of course, is that if you have Muslim activism becomes a form of identity politics, meaning that you are politically active as a Muslim by identity, but you are completely devoid of moral content, because you're not even sure in how a Muslim is different from anyone else, but you're just you're Muslim by identity, and so you play identity politics, and you see this a lot. I mean, you see this with a lot of Islamic organizations. What they're all about is like a form of identity politics in which ethnicity and Islamicity and all types of things are lumped together, and it's not very clear what's what and so on. That, of course, is a problem in itself, because then um, Islam as a religion, as a message, as a morality, as a system of ethics, falls apart. And if Muslims become empowered, they often lack any moral outlook or moral anything. I mean, where I saw that in a very alarming way is when I found Muslim organizations that have somehow cozied up to power institutions that took a very bizarre position on Black Lives Matter, for instance, or that took a very bizarre position on even the Muslim ban, with some Muslims defending the Muslim ban as somehow acceptable, or adhering to the mystification of power. Well, you know, we should just obey who's ever in power and not criticize them, and which is basically moral bankruptcy. I mean, it's basically saying we have no moral critique to offer, nothing to say. So you have these two very serious things, and they're both very real, and they're both and I don't know, I hate to sound dogmatic, but I don't see a way out but education. I mean, when I look at some of the Christian right that has been involved in politics, I mean, what strikes me is that the way these kids are weaned on the importance of Jesus to the world starts at a very early age. It continues on to their college choices. It continues on to their internships that they get in DC. It's like they're even, what was the name of that documentary we saw about the family? About, you know, how the world needs Jesus, and how you enter in politics carrying the Jesus banner. But I also know that a lot of people who are active in the Jewish community, they are, what guides them is a very strong educational infrastructure that drills in them Jewish values and the Jewish tradition and Jewish mythology and Jewish systems of belief, and till it becomes second nature. I mean, some of them are not even religious, but they know what Jewish values are. And what I think Muslims really miss is, maybe because I'm an educator, but the educational infrastructure that Muslims have is extremely poor, because most of our educators are not professional educators, not really educated themselves. So most of our educators are actually uneducated, and uneducated professionally and uneducated Islamically. So you have the double whammy. Most of them are just basically people who are average people who just most of our imams either still live in the medieval world. Their epistemology is very medieval. They have known nothing about the morality of the modern world, or live in the Middle East or Pakistan or India, and which is again a very serious problem. So I mean, I really think I want Muslims to be involved in politics. Absolutely. I want Muslims to be the best lawyers. A lot of lawyers go into politics, or a lot of politicians are ex-lawyers or whatever. I want more Muslims to be law professors and to be judges and to be. I want Muslims to understand that they have to open up pathways. But I also think that these Muslims need strong educational institutions to back them up. When ethical issues come up, they need to have sophisticated, learned people that they can consult with and they can speak with and get sophisticated advice, not dogmatic, not the type of advice that we get from our typical uncles and figures in the Muslim community these days. Yeah.
Great question.
Thank you so much. My question is in part about the Arabic in the first 10 or so verses. It's kind of strange when you're reading it because in the first 5 verses there's the usage of hu, right? It says like فَتَنْفَعُ, or it says لَعَلَّهُ. Right, so it's referring to him. And then there's a sharp change to فَأَنْتَ لَهُ, right? So it's, so unto him. So it, on like reflecting on this, for some time, I wondered if there was more to this narrative of I would very easily accept that the Prophet does indeed speak to the blind man in the future and say, thank this individual for being the one who set me right, in terms of the main principle that we take from this being the principle being that you focus on the individual who wants to be guided rather, and not on the results of getting someone who is up in the hierarchy. And I wanted to get your perspective on what do you think about this individual being sent by God essentially to the situation to teach not only the Prophet but also the Quraysh, because it feels that the chiding of the Prophet doesn't begin until verse 6, and that rather the chiding is more directed towards 2 archetypes, or one archetype that has 2 choices. One choice, what I'm in verse 3 when it's saying, what could inform thee, but what could inform thee? Could it be the blind man that is informing thee? Because that the reaction, that the feeling that I get is that this poor blind man who is likely unclean and by standards of the Qurayshi elite is coming and mixing in with these rich people who are concerned about their robes and don't touch me and don't get too near. It feels like that would be the immediate reaction of someone who was high up, rather than the immediate reaction of someone who in Alaq, Surah Alaq, God is saying you are of the greatest character. So yeah, I'm just wondering as to the change in hu versus anta, could that be suggestive of the chiding really coming in regards to this bigger idea of focus on those who want to be guided, and don't focus on the results of the quick results of getting those who are higher up, and that perhaps rather the one who is doing the most teaching here is the blind man to the Qurayshi elite. That there's two people that are really learning here. But yeah.
Yeah, the point about the grammar, it's not the who versus the anta. There are commentators that said when it starts out, it speaks as to عبس وتولى أن جاءه الأعمى وما يدريك لعله يتزكى ويتزكى فتنفعه الذكرى. That the ضمير المخاطب, who it's addressed to, is not specified, and when it starts out, it is talking about as if it's saying someone received a blind man, and that someone frowned, and that someone turned away, and then it starts speaking to the Prophet directly. And there are some who said that the reason it uses the style is because it's a more gentle way, and a more considered in Arabic usage, a more polite way of chiding or of correcting the Prophet. In Arabic, if you want to correct someone and do it very, very politely, you say, for instance, someone lost their temper. You don't say you lost your temper. And if the context is understood that it's you who lost your temper, but that's a polite way of doing it. And it's also the friendly way of doing it. So that's school number one, that said that basically the reason the Quran does that is that it uses that style with the Prophet ﷺ, in saying, someone turned away, someone frowned, and then starts talking to the Prophet, so it's understood that it is talking to the Prophet. The others said, closer to what the point that you're making, is that the reason it adopts that style is that, in fact, the lesson was directed more at the Qurayshi, and that's more, you find those, especially who are very, who defend the idea of infallibility of prophets, Prophet Muhammad, but also the prophets generally, that in fact that it was not really speaking to the Prophet, but speaking to the Qurayshis themselves, the elite. The second school, I don't follow, because for me the grammar just wouldn't make sense, because once it starts addressing the Prophet specifically, would say وَمَا عَلَيْكَ أَلَّا يَتْزَكَّى أو تَذَكَّرُ فَتَنْفَعُهُ الذِّكْرَى, or especially what says فأنت له تصدى فأنت عنه تلهى. It's speaking to the Prophet directly, and speaking in terms of, so you accommodate them, so you turn away from them. So it which convinces me that that this first point of view, that it's addressing the Prophet gently. The other thing is that it is not. It's not a sin. What the Prophet ﷺ alleged to have done, it's not a sin, and it would be what most ethical people would do, is to say, excuse me, but I'm busy right now. Can you wait for a second? I mean, so what? Um, but the point, there is a point, an important point that you're making though, is that I don't believe that anything that happens in the Prophet's life is not engineered by God. So I believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the blind man at the time that Allah sent the blind man in this, under the circumstances, and that the point was not to teach the Prophet anything, but the point is to teach us. And that there are many situations like this. I mean, and inshallah we'll talk about them, like with the Prophet's adopted son, when we get to that point, inshallah. There are just many situations where I believe that it is clear that Allah engineered the circumstance. If Allah wanted to teach the Prophet something, Allah would have just taught the Prophet something publicly, privately. But when Allah speaks to the Prophet, Allah is speaking to us, and we are the intended people from the moral lesson. And there are, when the Prophet quite humbly, I mean, it's a typical of his humility and the beauty of his personality, that he, when he tells Ibn Maktoum, hello, welcome to the man who Allah chided me for, or the man who was the instrument for Allah to chide me. I think he's actually like, it's a way of making Ibn Maktoum feel important, and a way of also communicating a moral lesson. Look, I am the Prophet, and I'm not embarrassed, and I am not argumentative, and I'm not arrogant about it. And in fact, I will, in front of you, appear grateful because I value the lesson. I believe all of this is for us. We are the intended audience. It's not. And the Prophet ﷺ, in so many situations, I mean, when I keep emphasizing follow the sunnah of the Prophet, I think when the Prophet ﷺ, as was his practice, when he would be walking in the streets of Medina, and a woman would come and grab his arm and take him to resolve a dispute between her and her husband, I think this was not just an off thing. The Prophet ﷺ was teaching us a sunnah. It's like saying, you want to be leaders, you want to walk this path, this is the way you have to be. So I fall maybe in the middle of the road, in the sense that I believe all of this was orchestrated to convey that moral lesson early on. And I think that point about virtue over political opportunism is something that was underscored so many times in the Quranic revelation. But we are the intended audience. I think that Allahu Alam, what revelation the Prophet received that was intended to him personally, that he didn't share with us. But if it was shared, especially if it made it to the text of the Quran, then we are the intended target, not the Prophet.
What is the dhikr for this chapter?
It's the entire surah.
Entire surah. Okay.
Thank you, Sheikh. I think it's more just it's a comment on your response to Shayan. That even though it is all authored by God, and God sent that human being. You know, we often just, our idea of revelation is that, you know, it just descends from on high and we just receive it. But in this episode, and I'm also thinking maybe the start of Mujadala, revelation looks like something far more dialectic. You know, in a sense, yes, God sent it, but a human being is still kind of triggering or provoking a revelation, a response from God. And is it Ibn Maktoum is kind of, I don't want to veer into kind of like shirk or heresy, but in a kind of like, he's almost shaping revelation, or they're still playing, it's not just top down, but bottom up, top down.
Like an authorship role almost.
Yeah, we're no less active in the shaping and making of revelation.
In reasoning with God,
Yeah.
I speak about the reports or occasions for revelations are unreliable, and these reports, when occasions for revelations are unreliable, it's not material to the text of the revelation. But there are situations where clearly the dialectic itself is part of the moral lesson. That we are supposed to study what happened, and the way that the revelation engages the community itself is part of the moral lesson. And in reasoning with God, if those of you who don't know, Reasoning with God is a book I wrote. I spend a lot of time talking about this because I think it's very critical that we understand that dialectic and appreciate the way that Allah is teaching us about the process of morality, not just the conclusion of morality. Because if you know, moral principles, if you don't often receiving moral principles as if they're mathematical equations, black and white, it just doesn't work. You have to learn how to think morally, and that's exactly what the Quran often does. It teaches us how to think morally.
Any questions here? Okay, I have a good. Okay, I'm gonna.
Oh, I can ask.
Do you want to ask?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's good.
Thanks.
Great question.
Okay. So, my question is on the verses of 24 to 32, which was the one where you provided the Sufi interpretation, and specifically when discussing the aspect of water from a spiritual understanding, there is this water that softens hearts and makes them less draconian, was your interpretation of the Sufi saying in Arabic, and that this, sorry, I should have compiled it a little better. But basically that this is, water is knowledge that brings a dead heart to life.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know more specifically, is there a more tangible understanding of how this water is accessed? How one who might be experiencing this can better understand and apply this to their own life?
Yeah, no, there's well, I mean, yeah, they talk about exactly what type of the ulum al-ma, that the epistemology or the system of knowledge that is like the water for a soul, and you know, if you are if you study, or if like even if you read like a book like Kitab al-Mizan by Sha'rani, you know, he talks about this at great length. But to give you a sense for our purposes, the all parts of knowledge that teach you humility and control of your egoism is part of what tenderizes the heart. So, for instance, give you just a very concrete example. In when you, if you are going through the path, you're taught a lot of metaphorical narratives about animals, stories about the fox and the lion and the, I don't know, usually animal figures. And you are supposed to go and ponder these stories at great lengths. A lot of these narratives are not about empirical knowledge, it's about wisdom. And when you, if you ask your sheikh, you know, why do I have to sit and ponder what the point of the story was, the fox or the turtle and whatever, and it says, you know, so that your soul will come to life. That was the learning. Um, uh, there well, they say that another, memorizing a lot of the poetry of al-Farid or Rab'a or the poetries al-Hallaj, all of that tenderizes the heart. So, I mean, Sufi poetry is another typical example. So yeah, no, there's a lot about that, but it generally it's the there are people who have great memories. The reason they excel in school is because they have great memories, but they don't necessarily have a great amount of comprehension. Well, these are the people who would have the hardest time with this type of knowledge. It's not the memory; it's that to understand the wisdom behind a metaphor, um, and to and and they say that the key to that type of knowledge is great patience. That the more impatient you are, the more incapable of having this knowledge penetrate your soul. The more you want fast answers, and like tell me what the curriculum is. I actually had um, one of the teachers that I used to I studied with for a while was he would exclude any student that asked him what the curriculum was, kick them out. So if you asked him what the curriculum was, you would say you can't attend my halaqa anymore. And because he would say that then you're insolent and impatient. It, which was interesting. I mean, I wish I could do that to my students, but I don't think the law school would let me get away with it. But insolent and impatient. So he would kick people out if they asked that. Of course, it eventually got around, so we'd actually tell people, don't ever ask him what the curriculum is. But there would still be students who would still defy and say, no, I'm going to ask. What are you talking about? Of course I'm going to ask him.
And so part of that too is because you asked me this question about prayer, service, empathy, these are all obviously paths to that water also.
No, but no. I mean, I took the question as
Yeah.
what is included in what they describe as the type of knowledge that is needed for the so no, but prayer, service, and empathy is what's needed to tenderize the heart, not necessarily the water knowledge.
But that's also, if you have an answer to that, that's also the second.
Yeah.
That's the second part of the
If-
question.
If
Okay.
you wouldn't mind
Yeah,
sharing
too.
more.
Yeah, knowledge. I mean, service and prayer and, but it's Anyway, but yes. What?
Did you want to? That was the other part of the question is like, what's the role? Because you have the water, and then you have the other part, the prayer, service, and empathy. Is there anything else to do to, like, further develop?
You know, if you're asking what do you need to develop that, dhikr and service. You know, the more you serve, the more you get out of your own big head. And all service. I mean, smiling at people is a service. You know, doing anything to help anyone is a service. You know, just go if you want to train yourself, just go to the supermarket and just offer help. You know, offer help to anyone you see. You will see the effect it will have on you. You'll see that when you pray, you'll feel Allah in a way you've never felt. The more, I'll even be even more concrete. A lot of people have like a dark cloud hanging over them. Do you know that the fastest way to remove the dark cloud is like, and they'll pray and they'll, you know, sit and pray sunnah and read Quran, and the cloud doesn't even budge. So we told them, okay, go dedicate yourself serving your mother, in just help your mother in the kitchen, clean the kitchen from bottom, top, go clean the bathrooms, go help your siblings, go to the supermarket, carry groceries to whoever. Yeah. And in no time, when they do that, the cloud starts dissipating. It's like literally, the darkness starts dissipating. And their prayer becomes far more effective. And their fasting becomes more effective. And when they do dhikr, it becomes far more effective. So, subhanAllah, it's like the Prophet ﷺ said that if you wish for good, then do good. And Allah has created these laws in the cosmos that are like the laws of causation in physics. These spiritual laws are as solid and constant as the laws of causation in physics. You want the darkness to start dissipating. You want your relationship with Allah to start improving. Serve, and you know, and serve the people that you normally would not like to serve. So if you've never liked to help your mother, go help your mother. If you always had a sibling that you've always thought is an idiot and stupid and you don't ever want to do anything for them, that's the person you should serve. If you've always had a neighbor that you thought is a jerk, and go offer them help. Serve. That is the great educator, and that's the path of Islam.
Okay, so we have just a few more minutes left, so I wanted to go back.
Haram, these people,
Well,
get some of their questions.
Yeah, I
haram.
know, well, one of them is from last time, because you asked for us to remind you about the question from Zomar about sleep. So can we do that one?
What's the question?
Okay, so I'm gonna read it from here. Okay, regarding sleep as a state of suspended death, could you elaborate more about sleep in relation to premonition or dream interpretation as practiced in some Muslim culture and rare spiritual phenomenon, for example, dreams about loved ones who have passed away, how to know if it's godly and not from demonic spirits, the story of Sufi masters that experienced rare spiritual phenomena and reports about the state of Prophet Muhammad when he received revelation. Also, if you could comment about it in light of recent study about sleep cycles, sleep cycles, brainwave frequency, etc. Do you remember this from last time?
Yeah, it's a rather big question. So I'll just because it's such a big question, then I'll touch upon tidbits because it's a really big question. But the there is in reflecting upon sleep will if you reflect on the dynamics of sleep, the way you lose consciousness, the way you regain consciousness, it's actually one of the things that you do to elevate your spirituality and to understand a lot about death. There's a lot of wisdom in reflecting upon sleep. When we are asleep, we are in a vulnerable state. Most of the times that the dreams we have are the vast majority of times is the product of our own subconscious and anxieties and worries and concerns. There are dreams that are demonic and that come from the demonic, and there are dreams that come from the divine. It is hard to set any fast and hard rules, but if you know a sheikh that you trust, my best advice is that if you demonic dreams are very heavy and they stay with you and you remember them, and so are divine dreams. My best advice is to but there are a lot of so-called sheikhs that are also pretenders, so be very cautious. Just because someone calls themselves a sheikh or leads prayer, it doesn't necessarily mean that they know what they're talking about. So just be very cautious. The part that I often I get the question is, can messages come from if there is a message from a dead relative, it is with Allah's permission, and it's usually for a very specific purpose, and it's usually so it is, yes, it is possible that someone who had passed away with Allah's permission would come to deliver a message, but don't assume that that's the case. So there, again, in the absence of giving a long lecture about what to look for and so on, you need someone who knows what they're talking about. You need to be able to consult with someone and not just to jump to conclusions. There are people who, anyway, even a lot of people that say they dreamt of the Prophet ﷺ, if if you see a truly life-altering beauty that is just truly luminous, not human features, but just luminous, so that you wake up feeling, I've never seen anything like this before, and you are literally extremely happy and feel like you are on cloud nine, and you wish that you could have stayed in this moment forever, then the likelihood is that you've seen the Prophet. If you see human features and you wake up, you're not so sure, did I see the Prophet, did I not see the Prophet, then probably you haven't seen the Prophet. Because I get a lot of people saying, you know, I've had this dream, did I see the Prophet? The Prophet doesn't appear in human features in dreams. And when the Prophet does appear, visit in a dream, it's an indescribable feeling. You are so positive, you are so certain, and you're so intoxicated by what you've seen. It's unmistakable. It's not like, oh, did I see it? You know, was it really the Prophet? It's not like that. I know that I didn't do the question justice, but it's so huge that you know, I would have to give a whole.
I mean, in the absence of having like a fuller lecture, and because it's so difficult for people to determine, you know, someone who they can trust and not, isn't it better just to, unless you have that, ignore all else?
Yes, it's better to always assume that if you have no other choice, then it's better to always assume that is a product of your naughty subconscious. Because your subconscious is very complex, and it is often a big troublemaker, and it will often picks little bits and pieces of memory and throws them at you when you're asleep. So when in doubt, just think that if it's something, if you've had an experience with a dream that has left a big impact on you, that you can't get it out of your mind, then you can write me about it. But you know, I'm not talking about just like a dream that sort of bothered you somewhat. It's a dream that usually you just can't get it out of your mind.
Okay, but if you do write, don't expect an answer quickly, because
Yeah,
everyone always.
It
we get
takes me
so much.
Yeah, it takes me a long time to respond because I get a lot of correspondence.
Yeah.
I get a lot of people writing, and a lot of times I just can't catch up. I can't keep up. You know, if I had the secretarial.
I mean, if you answered everything that you
Yeah.
every inquiry, you would do nothing else, and you still would not answer everything.
Yeah, I would just need the secretariat. I just like need a bunch of employees.
So, but better, because also you said if you're in a vulnerable state, better to just ignore all else.
Yeah, yeah.
Every factor.
Is there?
No, I think that I think we've reached our limit for tonight. So, thank you everyone again, and I'm sorry. I know it's hard because people have a lot of questions, but we just we set a time limit, and then we tried to stick to that so we can preserve the Sheikh's energy. So sorry about that. Hopefully, maybe in the future we could start doing Q&As again, maybe after this project or something. So thank you.
Or you could limit the number of questions that people have here can ask.
Okay, so we will try and figure out something else. Okay, so thank you so much, everybody, for another wonderful session, and inshallah we will see you Saturday. Okay,
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.